We're joined now by Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, author of this op-ed and a key voice in trying to reform the Endangered Species Act. Congresswoman, welcome. This is a remarkable story. I feel like this is such a parable of the left. The left is always the first to want to conserve trees and animals and the earth. And it's funny because they often don't know the first thing about living out in the country or the wild or living in the earth.
I think that that's a fair assessment of the situation that we're in. Really, what you have to understand about the Endangered Species Act is that it has largely become a zoning mechanism by which these radical environmental organizations are able to control large swaths of real property and water. It's not so much about the species itself, because everyone agrees that the grizzly bear has been recovered for over 2 decades. Keep in mind, our recovery goal was about 500 grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and we have over 1,100, and we have since the early 2000s. So it is a success story, but when we have these success stories, the environmental groups don't want to relinquish the power and the control they have by keeping species on the list.
Well, so what you're laying out is far more nefarious. I mean, it's not only do they, in my view, I feel like they don't understand the countryside, they don't understand nature, but they're weaponizing this as a way to, preserve more land? I mean, what benefit is it to them?
Control and limit development, control and limit our ability to log, for example, in our national forests, control and limit our ability to build water infrastructure, control and limit our ability to build affordable housing, any kind of development. So really,
but is it control just for control's sake? I mean, what other things are at play here?
Well, sure. So you can use the grizzly bear. You can use the gray wolf is another example. They brought in 35 gray wolves into Wyoming in the mid-1990s. By the year 2001, we had a fully recovered population. I filed my first lawsuit because they refused to delist in 2002, and it took 15 years going through a court system to finally get the gray wolves delisted. But in the meantime, they're expanding their area. They're going well outside of the national parks and the national forest and federal lands. They're impacting our livestock industry. They're impacting our outfitting and hunting industries, our tourism industries, because they're kind of a killing machine. We're talking about 2 apex predators with both the grizzly and the gray wolf. And so what it does is it limits our ability to use our resources.
Well, what do you say to critics who argue that delisting grizzlies could lead to overhunting or an ecological imbalance in a place like Wyoming? What do you say to that?
So it's really it's a very unscientific way of looking at what wildlife management is and the North American model. We are fully capable of managing these resources already. We already do it. We do it with our elk, with our moose, with antelope, with deer, with wild turkeys, with bobcats, with mountain lions. You can look across the interior West, and we do a very good job of managing our wildlife resources. They are predominantly managed by the states. Even species that are listed as endangered or threatened are largely managed by the states. It's just that there are restrictions on what we can do and how we can use our resources in areas where you have critical habitat designated or you have endangered or threatened species. So we have markers. We have ways of counting. We have ways of determining whether there is an issue with survivability. So go back to the very basis of the Endangered Species Act. The purpose of it was to ensure this species did not become extinct. So what the goal should be is just to make sure that we are recovering the species so that they don't become extinct. And what has happened, though, over the last 50 years since the Endangered Species Act was adopted is, again, it has become a tool or a mechanism by which radical environmental groups can stop development. They can prevent us from being able to build infrastructure that we need. They can block pipelines. They can stop us from being able to manage these predators in a way that actually protects our other wildlife species. So yes, control and power is in and of itself part of the end goal.
Interesting. No, I think that they're going to face an uphill battle in places like your state, especially if legislation like what you've proposed or the amendments you proposed go through. They're not going to have a lot of friends within the administration. And I think that may be the good news in the long run at least for the next
It
three
is.
and a half years.
The amendments that we're
Go
proposing to
ahead.
the Endangered Species Act will actually be more effective at protecting and recovering endangered and threatened species. But what it will also do is make sure that we have a balance in terms of how we manage these resources. One of the things that so many people forget is that we as human beings are also part of the natural environment. And so when we are assessing the costs, and we're assessing the management and determining the best plan forward, the best management plan for these species, we need to take everything into consideration. And again, Wyoming has spent well over $1 million recovering the grizzly bear. We do a fabulous job here in Wyoming, our Game and Fish Department, at managing our wildlife resources, and have for decades and decades and decades and decades. It's why we have such an abundance of wildlife. We don't need the federal government to dictate how we manage these resources, because we already do an excellent job at it. But what we also need to do is we need to make sure that we're considering all different kinds of other factors when assessing whether a species is recovered and how we manage them into the long term. Right now, the courts have really taken the Endangered Species Act and manipulated it in a way that we can't manage any of our species as well as we could and should.
Yeah, and all in the name of trying to control property and how we use it. And it's a pervasive practice. And I'm glad that you're raising awareness to it through your amendments and your proposals. I want to move over to another topic, very interesting, out of your state. I guess he's a constituent of yours. Wyoming entrepreneur Reed Rasner has submitted a nearly $50 billion bid to acquire TikTok from China. We've had him on the show before to ask him to kind of lay out this plan. And TikTok obviously is based in China. It's owned by ByteDance. It's aligning with the Trump administration's push for American ownership and proposing a Wyoming-based, creator-driven platform model. That's what Reed is hoping to push through. One that kind of mirrors the way that Elon Musk's efforts have played out with Twitter. What are your thoughts on relocating TikTok over to U.S. headquarters and based out of Wyoming, according to Rasner's plan?
I can understand why people want to bring these high-tech businesses to the state of Wyoming. We have an excellent workforce. We have a wonderful standard of living. It's a beautiful place to live. The climate is conducive to these kinds of businesses right here in Cheyenne. We've had quite a few different data centers and things being constructed here because of our climate. We have affordable energy. We're one of the largest energy producers in the nation. So I can sure understand why people would want to bring businesses to Wyoming.
So I take it you support this if it were to transpire. I mean, obviously nothing is set in stone. There are still bidders out there, but he appears to have some kind of conversational channel with the administration. I take it that this would be a welcome addition to the state.
I always look forward to bringing new businesses to Wyoming. I've said for a long, long time, we are open for business. I would like to see more manufacturing come into Wyoming for the very same reason. We have a skilled workforce. We have an excellent climate for it. And just the standard of living and the quality of life here is fabulous. So yes, I look forward to bringing new businesses to Wyoming at any opportunity.
I want to add one more topic before we leave. You recently defended the SAVE Act as something that was essential to national legislation. And obviously the requirements in the SAVE Act is to require documentary proof of U.S. citizenship for voting in federal elections. You've cited widespread public support and Wyoming's leadership in passing a similar law at the state level. How do you respond to critics who argue this very tired argument at this point? They say that requiring documentary proof of citizenship may disenfranchise eligible voters. Your response to that argument generally at this juncture?
We want to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. The fact is that I do not think that it is a burden to have to demonstrate that you are a citizen of this country and that you are a citizen of the state in which you're voting. I think that most countries have those kinds of requirements and people are fully able to post their ballots. I do not think that this type of a requirement poses the challenge that some of the critics have indicated. And this has really been put at the forefront or on the front burner in large part because of what Biden did over the last 4 years. According to the Biden
Right.
administration, the last official numbers that I got out of the Biden administration last fall was that there were over 12 million illegal aliens that came into our country in a 4-year period of time. When you flood our country with non-citizens, people who do not have a right to be here, and then you couple that with trying to minimize any kind of election safeguarding, then you've got a very serious issue. So I find it interesting that the people who are critical of these kinds of election integrity efforts are the very ones that flooded our country with illegal aliens. I think there's a connection there. And the fact is, I think that the SAVE Act is a common sense approach to ensuring that only American citizens are voting in our elections.
Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for joining us.